The laughter came soft, almost tender. Across the table, my son leaned toward his fiancée as she whispered in Italian, her lips brushing the rim of her wine glass. They laughed together, quiet, private, perfect. The room smelled of lemon and candles, the kind of scent meant to impress, not welcome. I smiled, polite and still, pretending I didn't understand a word. But I did. Every syllable cut gently, like silk hiding a blade. Before dessert, I decided that silence would no longer be my language. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent a lifetime learning how to survive without making noise. People often confuse quiet with peace. It isn't. It's just what's left when you've run out of places to put your anger. I was a teacher, a mother, and for a long time, the family's invisible backbone. I know what it means to love someone so fiercely you disappear. And maybe that's why I came tonight, even when every instinct told me not to. The message had arrived that morning. My fiancé is inviting you to dinner today. No hello, no warmth, just an order phrased like kindness. Daniel, my only son, has always been careful with words. He learned that from me. Speak gently, avoid storms, keep everyone comfortable. I thought that made him safe. Now I see it only taught him how to live inside someone else's weather. The table was perfect, like a magazine page. Clara, the fiancée, moved with the confidence of someone who never had to ask permission. She poured the wine and smiled too wide. "Evelyn, we wanted this dinner to feel special," she said. Her voice was soft, but sharp enough to slice through my composure. I thanked her, steady and formal, though my hands were trembling beneath the table. As she spoke about their wedding plans, I felt myself shrinking again, the way I used to around Daniel's father. Back then, I mistook endurance for dignity. Tonight, I could feel that old reflex crawling back. Every time I tried to speak, she filled the air with her own voice. When Daniel laughed at her stories, I told myself it was love that made him blind. But maybe it was fear. Then she turned to him, whispered again in Italian, and both of them smiled. The same secret laugh, the same dismissal. My heart didn't race, it slowed. Because in that stillness, I remembered that I used to dream in Italian once, before motherhood swallowed the girl who studied poetry at night school. She doesn't know I understand her. She doesn't know the woman she's underestimating once built a life from ashes. I lifted my glass and met her gaze. "To family," I said. My voice didn't shake. She blinked, uncertain, the first crack in her perfect performance. Daniel raised his glass, relieved. He didn't know something fundamental had shifted inside me. For years, I accepted disrespect as the price of love. Tonight, I felt the quiet seed of defiance bloom. The dinner ended with polite smiles, but my silence had changed shape. It wasn't submission anymore, it was control. Tomorrow my son will marry, and I will no longer be the woman who apologizes for breathing. Some dinners change more than families. They change the quiet inside us. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories travel. The next morning, the house was too quiet. Sunlight crept across the hardwood floor like it was afraid to wake me. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling between my hands, replaying the dinner in my mind. The laughter, the whispers, the moment I looked into Clara's eyes and decided something had to end. Maybe the pattern, maybe the silence, maybe both. The garden outside looked peaceful, but inside, I felt like a storm that had finally remembered its own name. Daniel texted around 9. "Thanks for coming last night. Clara said it meant a lot." I stared at the words, wondering if he believed them. I typed, deleted, typed again, and finally sent back, "You're welcome, sweetheart. I wish you both happiness." It was the kind of thing mothers are expected to say, but underneath, I wanted to add, "Don't let her take your voice." Of course I didn't. Not yet. I turned off my phone and walked outside. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. My garden, my quiet rebellion, was alive with color. For years I'd planted flowers because they stayed. People left, promises broke, but lilies and roses returned. As I watered them, I thought about all the ways I'd disappeared to keep peace. Letting Daniel's father make every decision, giving up my art, pretending to agree when I didn't. I used to call it love. Now I call it fear, disguised as devotion. Inside, the clock ticked. Each sound reminded me how close the wedding was, less than 24 hours now. The thought made my chest tighten. It wasn't jealousy or bitterness. It was something heavier, the realization that my son was about to start a new life built on silence, the same kind that once trapped me. I picked up my old sketchbook from the counter. Dust clung to its cover. I hadn't drawn in years. My hands shook a little as I flipped through pages. Faces of women, most of them sad, some defiant. I paused on one I'd drawn the night after my husband left. The woman in the sketch had her mouth closed, but her eyes wide open, as if she'd seen too much. I remember thinking then, one day I'll give her a voice. Maybe that day had come. A car horn outside startled me. The mail carrier waved from the road, handing me a small envelope. The handwriting was Daniel's. My heart skipped. Inside was a note. "Mom, we're having a small rehearsal dinner tonight at the Vineyard. Hope you can come. Clara wants things smooth tomorrow." I laughed under my breath. "Smooth," I said aloud, the word tasting bitter. Smooth meant silence again. I spent the afternoon trying to decide whether to go. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman who'd been polite for too long. I practiced lines in my head, not cruel ones, but honest ones. Things like, "Daniel, love doesn't need to be controlled," or "Clara, respect isn't a threat." But I knew I couldn't plan truth. It had to come when it wanted to. As evening fell, I drove toward the Vineyard. The road wound through golden hills, the trees glowing in the fading light. I felt strangely calm. Maybe courage isn't loud. Maybe it's the quiet decision to show up as yourself, no matter who's watching. When I arrived, music drifted from the patio. People clinked glasses, laughter rising like smoke. Clara spotted me first. She waved, her smile precise. "Evelyn, you made it," she said, as if my presence were a test I'd finally passed. Daniel hugged me quickly, his eyes darting between us. I could feel his tension, his desperate hope that I'd behave. Dinner was formal, planned down to the last napkin. But under the lights, something in me refused to shrink. I noticed details I'd never seen before. The way Clara kept one hand on Daniel's arm when she spoke, the way he looked at her for cues. My heart ached, not from judgment, but from recognition. I'd been that woman once. Halfway through the meal, Clara raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said. Everyone cheered. I lifted my glass too, but my voice was clear, deliberate. "To beginnings built on truth," I said. The words weren't loud, yet the air shifted. Daniel looked at me, surprised, searching. Clara's smile faltered for a heartbeat before returning. When the toast ended, I excused myself and stepped outside. The night air was cool, the stars sharp and endless. I breathed deeply, feeling the weight of decades slide off my shoulders. Tomorrow, my son would marry. Tonight, I had reclaimed the one thing I'd lost without noticing, my freedom to speak. The morning of the wedding arrived dressed in sunlight, too bright for how heavy my heart felt. Birds chattered outside the window, as if joy were mandatory. I sat on the edge of my bed, the dress I'd chosen hanging on the closet door. A soft gray with lace along the collar. Dignified, simple, safe. I ran my fingers along the fabric and wondered when safe had become my only choice. Downstairs, the house was filled with quiet again. My coffee tasted bitter, my thoughts even more so. I kept replaying the night before, the look on Clara's face when I toasted to truth, the flicker of surprise in Daniel's eyes. I'd seen something there, something that gave me a fragile thread of hope. But hope can be dangerous when you've lived too long on the edge of disappointment. By mid-morning, a car horn announced Daniel's arrival. I peeked through the window and saw him standing by his car, fidgeting with his tie. He looked young again, nervous like the boy who once begged me to stay for one more bedtime story. I stepped outside, and he smiled. "Morning, Mom," he said softly. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," I replied, though he hadn't seen the dress yet. He hesitated before continuing. Clara wanted me to check if you were okay after last night. I'm fine, I said. My voice was calm, but I saw the unease in his eyes. Are you? He looked away. It's just, she's stressed. She wants everything perfect. Perfection can be lonely, I said. He didn't respond. The drive to the vineyard was quiet. Daniel focused on the road, and I watched the world rush by. Golden fields, white fences, a sky so wide it made me feel small. He reached for the radio, turned it on, then off again. You know, he said finally, Clara's family means a lot to her. She just wants everyone to get along. I understand, I said. But getting along doesn't mean disappearing. He frowned slightly, pretending he didn't understand. I didn't push. Some truths need to rest before they can be heard. When we arrived, the vineyard buzzed with activity. Flowers, photographers, guests dressed in soft pastels. Clara's family moved like a small army, each with a task. She stood near the arch of white roses, directing people with the precision of a general. When she saw me, her smile was perfect again. Evelyn, I'm so glad you made it, she said, brushing imaginary dust off my shoulder. We have a special seat for you. A special seat? I followed her gesture and saw it. A chair set slightly apart from the front row. Respectful distance disguised as honor. My stomach tightened, but I nodded. Thank you, I said. The ceremony began. The music was beautiful, the vows rehearsed. I watched my son's face as he promised forever, and I prayed silently, not for his marriage to be easy, but for it to be real. When Clara slipped the ring onto his finger, I caught her eyes for a moment. There was triumph there, quiet but unmistakable. After the ceremony, people moved toward the reception tent. Glasses clinked, laughter rippled. I walked among the guests, smiling, shaking hands. Some recognized me as the mother of the groom and offered polite compliments. Others barely looked at me. But I noticed something else. Daniel's eyes following me, a small crease between his brows. Maybe he sensed it too, the quiet tension beneath the celebration. Inside the tent, Clara made her way to me again. You must be proud, she said sweetly. He's everything a mother could want. He is, I said, and I hope you see everything he truly is. Her smile faltered for the briefest second. Of course, she said. We understand each other perfectly. No, I said gently. Not yet. A waiter passed by with champagne. I took a glass, my hand steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own story. I was there, fully there, watching, feeling, breathing as the woman I'd once promised myself I would become. The band began to play a slow song. Daniel walked over, his tie loosened, his expression soft. Dance with me? He asked. I hesitated, then took his hand. On the dance floor, under the glow of string lights, we moved slowly. You seem different, he said quietly. I am, I answered. I remembered who I am. He looked down at me, his eyes glassy. You've always been strong. No, I said, smiling faintly. I've just been quiet. There's a difference. When the song ended, applause rose around us. But for me, it wasn't applause I heard. It was the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and sure. For the first time in decades, I felt alive in my own skin. The reception carried on with music and chatter, but beneath the laughter, I could feel a strange current moving through the room. Clara floated between tables, flawless and composed, thanking guests and keeping the spotlight fixed exactly where she wanted it. Daniel followed her steps closely, his smile obedient, his hand never too far from hers. Watching him like that brought back a memory I hadn't touched in years, the way his father used to guide me at parties, a hand at my back that looked protective but felt like a leash. I stood near the bar, sipping water and pretending not to notice the sideways glances. People whispered, mostly women from Clara's side of the family, their voices soft but sharp. Words like old-fashioned and fragile drifted to my ears. I had been called worse. I turned my back to them and looked out the open tent toward the hills. The vineyard stretched endlessly, the vines gold in the sun, the horizon wide and forgiving. Then Daniel appeared beside me. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. "You look tired." He gave a half smile. "It's a big day." "It is," I replied. "You did well." He hesitated, eyes searching mine. "Clara told me she might have pushed a little too hard at dinner the other night. I told her you wouldn't take it personally." I studied his face. "Did she say why she thought she pushed too hard?" He shook his head. "She just wants everyone to get along." "That's important," I said softly, "as long as no one disappears in the process." He frowned, but before he could respond, Clara's voice cut through the noise. "Daniel, photos!" He turned, caught between duty and conversation. "Go," I said. "It's your day." As he walked away, I saw her hand slip into his, guiding him back to the crowd. The photographer posed them perfectly, every smile, every gesture curated. I watched, invisible again. But this time, invisibility wasn't submission. It was observation. A little girl, maybe 8, tugged on my dress. "You're the groom's mom," she said shyly. "I am," I smiled. "How did you know?" "You have the same eyes," she said, then ran off before I could thank her. The words sank deep. The same eyes. Maybe Daniel hadn't lost all of me after all. I wandered to the far edge of the vineyard, away from the music. The air carried the faint sweetness of grapes and dust. For a moment I let the noise fade until all I could hear was wind. I thought about what it meant to be a mother. The giving, the bending, the slow erasure of self that sometimes feels like love. But standing there, I realized something new. Maybe love isn't the losing of yourself, but the returning to who you were before fear taught you to hide. When I went back, Daniel and Clara were cutting the cake. Guests clapped and cheered. Clara fed him a small piece and dabbed the corner of his mouth with a napkin. It was a perfect image, glossy and delicate. Then, as the crowd dispersed, she approached me. "Evelyn," she said warmly, "I wanted to thank you again for being so supportive. It means a lot to Daniel." "I'm his mother," I said. "Support comes naturally." Her smile tightened. "Still, it's good we understand each other." "I think we're starting to," I replied. She tilted her head, curiosity flickering. "You seem different today." "I suppose I am," I said. "Freedom looks good on me." For the first time since we'd met, Clara didn't have an answer. She just looked at me, puzzled, maybe even a little wary, before turning away to greet another guest. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the vineyard bathed in amber light, Daniel came to say goodbye before leaving for their honeymoon. He hugged me tightly, longer than usual. "Thank you for everything, Mom," he whispered. "Be happy, Daniel," I said. "And remember, kindness isn't the same as silence." He nodded, unsure if he understood, but held my gaze long enough for me to believe he wanted to. When he left, I stayed a while longer, sitting on the empty patio as lanterns flickered overhead. For the first time in years, the quiet around me didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The vineyard looked different the next morning, emptier, softer, as if it too had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Workers cleared the chairs and floral arches while birds picked at crumbs left behind. I stood at a distance, near the fence, watching the last traces of the wedding fade into memory. The celebration was over, and in its wake came silence again, but not the same kind. This silence carried space, possibility. I had stayed the night at a small inn nearby, one of those old New England places with creaky floors and lace curtains. The morning light poured through the window, and for a moment I felt suspended between two versions of myself, the woman who arrived at dinner still seeking approval, and the one now packing her suitcase with a quiet, deliberate calm. My reflection in the mirror looked older, yes, but also steadier. I didn't flinch at my own eyes anymore. I sat at the edge of the bed and reached for my phone. No new messages. Daniel and Clara were likely on a plane to Italy by now, the irony not lost on me. I wondered if he'd think of me when he heard the language spoken around him, if he'd remember that his mother once understood every word. At breakfast downstairs, an elderly couple sat beside me. They were talking about family, about how hard it is to let go. I smiled politely, pretending to read the paper, but their words slipped into me. Letting go wasn't my problem. Holding on had always been. Holding on to roles that no longer fit, to people who needed me small. After checking out, I decided to take the long road home. The drive wound through hills touched with early autumn color. Every turn felt like a lesson in release. What you leave behind still shapes you, but it doesn't have to define what comes next. Halfway through the drive, I stopped at a roadside cafe I used to visit years ago with Daniel. The same wooden tables, the same smell of cinnamon and coffee. The waitress recognized me. "You haven't been here in ages," she said with a grin. "How's your boy?" "He just got married," I replied. The words came out gently, without the sting I expected. "Well, congratulations," she said. "You must be proud." "I am," I said, and for once it was true in the right way. Not pride born of sacrifice, but of survival. When I got back to my car, I didn't start the engine right away. I opened my old sketchbook from the passenger seat. A blank page stared back at me. For a long time, I just held the pencil above it, afraid to mark it wrong. Then I drew. The curve of a vineyard hill, the outline of two people walking away, small but steady. I didn't think about technique or symmetry. I just let my hand move. By the time I finished, the drawing looked alive, imperfect, and entirely mine. The next few weeks passed quietly. I returned to my small house, trimmed the garden, and went back to teaching at the community center. My students were mostly retired women, each with stories heavy enough to fill libraries. One afternoon, after class, a woman named Linda lingered behind. "You talk a lot about courage," she said, "but you never talk about your own." I smiled. "Maybe I'm still finding the words." She nodded thoughtfully. "Then keep talking. It helps the rest of us too." That night, I sat at the kitchen table again, the same place where I'd read Daniel's message weeks ago. The phone was silent, but my mind wasn't. I thought about calling him, then decided to wait. He needed space to grow, and so did I. Love, I was learning, isn't about staying close. It's about letting truth breathe. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a quiet promise. For the first time, I didn't feel lonely in the stillness. I felt whole. I had been a mother, a wife, a giver, a ghost. Now, I was simply Evelyn, no title, no role, just a woman reclaiming her life one breath at a time. 3 weeks after the wedding, I woke up to an unexpected sound, my phone buzzing on the nightstand. The name on the screen made my heart stumble. Daniel. For a second, I just stared at it, unsure if I was ready. Then I answered. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice quiet. "Are you busy?" "No," I said, sitting up. "Just drinking my coffee. How's Italy?" He hesitated. "We're back. Got home last night." There was something off in his tone, flat, careful. "How was the trip?" I asked gently. He paused, exhaled. "It was beautiful," he said, then after a beat, "and complicated." I didn't press. He'd tell me when he was ready. Instead, I said, "I'm glad you're home safe." "I was wondering," he continued, "if I could come by later. Just us." "Of course," I said, though my stomach tightened. "Any time." When he hung up, the house felt suddenly smaller, like it was bracing for something. I tidied the living room, brewed a new pot of coffee, and tried not to imagine the worst. By noon, his car pulled into the driveway. He walked in carrying a paper bag from the bakery down the street, the one we used to visit when he was little. "I brought croissants," he said, setting them on the counter. "Your favorite," I replied. He smiled faintly. "I guess old habits survive." We sat at the table, the same one that had seen decades of quiet meals and careful words. For a while we ate in silence, the air heavy with things unsaid. Finally he spoke. "Mom, can I ask you something? At the wedding, what did you mean when you said, 'to beginnings built on truth'?" I met his eyes. "I meant that truth keeps things alive, Daniel, even when it's uncomfortable. Lies, even small ones, turn love into control." He nodded slowly. "I think I know what you mean." His voice cracked slightly, and the truth tumbled out, not all at once, but in fragments. How Clara had corrected him in front of strangers, how she dismissed his ideas, how he kept pretending everything was fine. "I thought maybe that's just how strong people love," he said, "that they take charge." "That's not strength," I said softly. "That's fear wearing confidence as a costume." He looked down, rubbing his hands together. "I don't know what to do." "Then start by listening to yourself," I said. "You've spent your whole life trying to keep peace for others. Maybe it's time to make peace with yourself." For a moment, we sat in silence, the kind that felt healing instead of hollow. Then he said, "You're different, Mom. It's like you're lighter." I smiled. I stopped carrying what wasn't mine. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry if I ever made you feel small." "You didn't make me," I said. "I chose it, because I thought love meant shrinking. But we can both stop now." He nodded, tears in his eyes. Then, as if something released inside him, he laughed quietly. "You know, Clara would hate this talk." I laughed too. "Then maybe she should have dinner with me again." That broke the tension. We talked for hours about his childhood, his dreams, the life he wanted to build, not just maintain. I could see pieces of the boy he used to be merging with the man he was trying to become. It made me proud, but not in the old way. This pride wasn't about control or success. It was about watching him finally wake up to himself. When he left, he hugged me tightly. "I'll call soon," he said. "You will," I answered, not as a command, but a truth I believed. After he drove away, I stood at the window, the afternoon light spilling across the floor. For years, I had begged the world to see me. Now I realized the world didn't have to. I just needed to see myself, and to let my son see me too. I walked back to the table, poured the last of the coffee, and whispered to the empty room, "Beginnings built on truth." The words didn't feel heavy anymore. They felt like a promise kept. A week later, the phone rang again. This time, it was not Daniel, it was Clara. Her name on the screen stopped me cold. For a second, I considered letting it ring, but something in me said answer. "Hello?" "Evelyn, hi," she said, her tone too sweet, too measured. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "You're not," I said, though I could already feel the tension tightening across my shoulders. "I was wondering if we could talk," she said. "In person. There are things I'd like to clear up." I paused. "All right. When?" "Tomorrow," she said. "Lunch? There's a cafe near the river. Daniel has a meeting, but I'd really like to speak privately." There was that word again, privately. It sounded less like invitation and more like strategy. Still, I agreed. "Tomorrow's fine." After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. The garden shimmered under late morning light. A part of me felt the old fear rising, the reflex to stay small, to avoid confrontation. But another part of me, the part that had survived worse storms, whispered, "You're not her opponent. You're your own witness now." That night I barely slept. I imagined every possible version of the conversation, polite apologies, veiled threats, forced smiles. But morning came, and with it, a strange calm. I chose a linen blouse and simple gold earrings, the kind that made me feel grounded. I looked in the mirror before leaving and said quietly, "You've already lived through humiliation. This is just conversation." The cafe overlooked the Connecticut River, calm and gray beneath an overcast sky. When I walked in, Clara was already seated, immaculate as always, white blouse, diamond studs, perfect posture. She smiled when she saw me, but her eyes didn't. "Evelyn," she said, standing to shake my hand. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," I replied, sitting down. "You said you wanted to talk." "Yes," she said. "I wanted to clear the air. I think we got off on the wrong foot." I'm sure neither of us meant for things to be awkward. Her tone was soft, but every word was shaped like a boundary she wanted to control. I nodded politely. "I agree," I said. "But awkwardness usually has roots." She blinked. "Pardon?" "I mean," I continued, Misunderstandings don't grow out of nowhere. They're planted by fear, by pride, sometimes by love. It helps to know which one we're dealing with. Clara studied me. Daniel told me you've been through a lot, she said. I admire your strength. That's kind, I said, though it sounded like pity disguised as flattery. I just want Daniel to be happy, she went on. He's sensitive, you know. He needs stability. Stability is important, I said, but it's different from control. Her smile froze. I'm not controlling. I didn't say you were, I said gently. But I've lived long enough to know the difference between guiding someone and deciding for them. One builds love, the other builds fear. For the first time, Clara looked uncertain. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. You don't like me, do you? She asked finally. I don't know you well enough not to, I said. But I do see parts of myself in you. The parts that used to think being strong meant always being right. Her gaze softened, if only slightly. Daniel says you've changed. I have, I said. And I hope he does too. That's what love is, growth, not control. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the river shimmered with sunlight breaking through the clouds. Clara looked away first. I didn't mean to make you feel unwelcome, she said quietly. That night. I believe you, I said, and I forgive you. But forgiveness isn't permission. It's clarity. She looked at me, confused but thoughtful. For the first time, her voice lost its polish. I'll try to remember that. When we stood to leave, she reached out her hand again. This time, I took it firmly. Take care of him, I said, and of yourself. As she walked away, I watched her shoulders tense, then ease slightly, as if something heavy had shifted inside her too. Outside, I leaned on the railing, looking at the slow-moving river. The current carried leaves and light together, making no effort to separate them. Maybe that's how life works. Nothing purely good, nothing purely painful, just movement. And I, for once, felt like I was finally flowing with it instead of fighting against it. That night, the rain came hard, sweeping across the windows like someone determined to be heard. I sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea, letting the thunder roll through the house. It felt cleansing, as if the sky was doing the work I had avoided for years. My talk with Clara had ended better than I imagined, but it left me raw. Not because of what she said, but because of what I saw in her, a reflection of the woman I once was, graceful, calculating, terrified of losing control. The fire popped, and I smiled faintly. Growth is rarely elegant. It burns and cracks before it settles. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Daniel. Thank you for meeting with Clara. She told me it helped. Then another. You really surprised me lately, Mom. In a good way. I typed back. I'm just learning how to be honest again. Then added, that's a lifelong lesson. He replied with a single heart. Simple, but enough. The next morning, I woke early and decided to walk into town. The air smelled of wet pavement and pine. I passed the bakery, the bookstore, the art shop I used to visit when I still believed in time for myself. Its window displayed a sign, Fall Workshop, Painting from Memory. Something tugged at me. I went inside. The shop owner, a silver-haired man named George, looked up and smiled. Haven't seen you in a while, Evelyn. Been busy remembering who I am, I said. He laughed softly. Then you came to the right place. We start next week. Tuesdays and Thursdays. I hesitated, fingers brushing a set of paintbrushes on the counter. They felt light and familiar in my hand. Sign me up, I said. That night, I prepared the small room upstairs that I used to call storage. I cleared out boxes of old clothes, dusty photo albums, forgotten bills. By the time I finished, the room felt new, bare walls, open space, light from the window spilling across the floor. I placed a wooden easel in the center. It stood like a promise. When Tuesday arrived, I joined the class. There were 6 of us, mostly women my age, each carrying invisible stories. The teacher, a kind woman named Ruth, encouraged us to paint from emotion, not memory. The truth of a moment, she said, isn't what happened. It's what stayed inside you. That sentence landed deep. My brush moved across the canvas before I had time to think. I painted a table, 3 chairs, a half-finished meal, a woman smiling politely as others laughed. It was the dinner from weeks ago, but transformed, colors softer, shadows honest. When Ruth stopped by to look, she said, "That woman has something she's not saying." "She's learning," I replied. After class, Ruth asked if I'd ever shown my work before. I laughed. "Once, to a 3-year-old with jelly on his hands." She smiled. "Maybe it's time for a different audience." At home, I hung the painting in the hallway. It stopped me every time I walked by. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was true. Days grew shorter, the air colder. Daniel called often. Small things, checking in, telling me about work, about Clara's new job. There was warmth in his voice again, less caution. Once, he said, "You know, Clara's been different lately, softer. I think you got through to her." "I didn't," I said. "Life did. It always does when we start listening." Later that night, I wrote a short note on a piece of paper and taped it beside my painting. It read, "Every silence can become a voice if you have the courage to listen to yourself first." For years, I had been the quiet one at the table, the woman who said thank you instead of stop. Now my voice didn't need to fill rooms. It just needed to exist, and it did. The next morning, sunlight poured into the room again. I didn't hide from it this time. Autumn arrived in full color, gold, rust, and soft brown sweeping across Connecticut like a long sigh of relief. Every morning, I woke early to paint before breakfast, the brush moving through my hand as if it had been waiting all these years. The act itself became a kind of prayer, a slow return to myself, one quiet stroke at a time. At the community center, my students noticed the change in me before I did. "You smile more," Linda said one afternoon as she arranged her palette. "Did something happen?" "I started listening," I replied. "To what?" she asked. "To the parts of me I used to ignore." She nodded, dipping her brush into blue paint. "Then maybe I'll start listening too." That simple exchange stayed with me all day. It was strange how the smallest sentences could echo louder than years of noise. That evening, Daniel called again. "Mom, guess what?" he said, his voice bright for the first time in a while. "Clara's thinking about taking Italian lessons. She said she wants to understand where I come from." I smiled. "That's a good start." "She also asked if you'd like to have dinner with us when you're ready. No pressure, just us." The idea didn't scare me like it once would have. "Let's see how the week goes," I said gently. "But tell her thank you." "I will," he said. "And Mom, thank you too, for not giving up on me." When the call ended, I sat for a long time in the quiet. I thought about the way life folds back on itself, how one small act of courage can ripple through people who never even asked for it. The next day, during my painting class, Ruth surprised me. "Evelyn," she said, "we're putting together a small exhibition of local artists next month. Would you consider showing something?" The thought froze me. "I don't know if I'm ready." "Readiness is overrated," she said. "Truth is enough." I agreed before I could talk myself out of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept walking to the hallway, staring at the painting of the dinner table. The image that once represented pain now looked like power, a moment of quiet defiance captured forever. I decided that would be the one I'd show. When the day of the exhibition came, the small gallery buzzed with conversation. The walls glowed under soft lights, each canvas a heartbeat turned outward. My painting hung near the entrance, and as people passed, I heard snippets of their thoughts. "That woman looks strong," one said. "She looks like she's choosing peace, not silence," said another. Ruth approached with a proud smile. "People are drawn to her." "They should be," I said quietly. "She's every woman who forgot her own name and found it again." As I stood there, I noticed Daniel and Clara enter the gallery. My breath caught, but not from fear. They walked toward me hand in hand, less like performers and more like equals. Clara stopped in front of the painting and studied it. After a moment, she turned to me. "She looks familiar," she said softly. "She should," I replied. You met her once. For a long time, Clara said nothing. Then she nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that felt truer than any apology. Daniel slipped an arm around my shoulder, and for the first time, our silence wasn't heavy. It was shared, safe. When the evening ended, Ruth clinked a glass to get everyone's attention. "To every artist brave enough to turn their pain into light," she said. Glasses lifted, and I raised mine too. I caught my reflection in the window, gray hair, steady eyes, a smile that didn't ask permission. This was the woman I had been hiding for too long. The gallery lights dimmed, and for a moment, everything went still. Not the quiet of suppression, but of peace, the kind that grows when you finally make room for your own voice. A few weeks passed after the exhibition, and life began to unfold in a rhythm that felt both unfamiliar and deeply right. Mornings belonged to painting, afternoons to teaching, and evenings to small rituals of peace. Music, tea, reading under the soft glow of a lamp. For the first time in decades, my days weren't filled with waiting for someone else's need. They were mine. One Saturday, I decided to visit my sister Margaret in Hartford. We hadn't spoken much in recent years. Too many unspoken resentments had settled between us. Her belief that I'd chosen weakness by staying with my husband too long. My quiet resentment that she'd never understood the loneliness of survival. But time had softened us both. When I arrived, she opened the door with that familiar mix of affection and guardedness. "Evelyn," she said, surprised. "You look different." "Alive?" I said with a small laugh. She smiled. "That too." Over coffee, we talked about everything we'd avoided, our marriages, our children, the ways we'd both been shaped by silence. She admitted she used to judge me, but only because she was afraid of seeing herself in my choices. I told her I'd spent years mistaking endurance for virtue. We sat in that truth together, and something between us healed without ceremony. Before I left, she handed me a small photo album. "You might want this," she said. "It's from Mom's things. I think you forgot it." Inside were pictures of us as children, sunburned, wild-haired, laughing on the beach with our parents. I hadn't seen those faces in years. On the last page, there was a photo of me at 20, holding a paintbrush, smiling at the camera like I had no idea what was waiting ahead. Driving home, I couldn't stop thinking about that girl. She wasn't gone. She'd just been buried under decades of obedience and fear. But now, she had air again. The following week, Daniel called to invite me to dinner, this time at my house. "Clara wants to help cook," he said. I hesitated. "She cooks?" He laughed. "She's trying. Be kind." When they arrived, Clara carried a bouquet of sunflowers. "For your studio," she said. "They reminded me of your paintings." "Thank you," I said sincerely, placing them in a vase. The air between us felt lighter, tentative, but real. Over dinner, conversation flowed more naturally. Clara asked questions without sharpness, and Daniel looked relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since before the wedding. After dessert, she glanced at the painting hanging in my hallway. "That's the one from the gallery," she said. "It's powerful." "It was a hard moment," I replied. "But sometimes hard things turn into something honest." She nodded, eyes glistening a little. "I think I understand that now." When they left, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't empty. I could still hear their laughter echoing softly, like music fading into memory. Later that night, I stood in my studio. The painting of the dinner table hung on one wall, and across from it, a blank canvas waited. I thought of everything that had changed, the courage that had come not with anger, but with stillness. I began to paint again. This time, the image was of the vineyard at dusk, the sky deep orange, the vines bending in the wind, and in the center, a single figure walking away. Not lost, but free. As color filled the canvas, I whispered to myself, "You did it." Not with pride, but with peace. Outside, the world went quiet again, but this silence didn't belong to anyone else. It was mine. Winter crept into Connecticut slowly, the air thinning until breath itself felt visible. The mornings came quieter now, snow balancing on the bare branches of the oaks behind my house. I liked that kind of silence, the kind you don't have to earn or fear. One Sunday morning, as I shoveled the driveway, a car pulled up. Daniel stepped out, his coat unbuttoned, cheeks red from the cold. "You shouldn't be doing that," he said, taking the shovel from me. "I like it," I replied. "It's peaceful work." He grinned. "You've changed, Mom." "I know," I said. Finally. Inside, I made hot cocoa like I used to when he was little. We sat at the table, steam rising between us. He looked tired but lighter, like someone slowly learning how to rest inside his own skin. "How's married life?" I asked. He exhaled. "Better. We're figuring things out. Clara's been seeing someone for counseling. She says she wants to understand herself more." "That's a good sign," I said. "Understanding yourself is the only way to stop hurting people you love." He nodded. "She mentioned she might want to talk with you again. No pressure, though." "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with the honesty in my voice. He sipped his cocoa. "You know what's funny? I thought growing up meant learning to keep everything together. But maybe it's about letting some things fall apart." I smiled. "Exactly. You can't rebuild until something cracks first." He laughed softly. "You sound like your art teacher now." "Maybe I do," I said. She was right about one thing. Truth doesn't always look pretty, but it's the only thing that lasts. He glanced at the painting on the wall, the one from the vineyard. "That's my favorite," he said. "It feels like freedom." "It is," I said quietly. "That's what it cost. And that's what it gave back." After he left, I watched him from the window. He turned once before getting in the car and waved. It was such a small gesture, but it reached me deeply. Years ago, I would have felt sadness watching him go. Now, I only felt pride, because he was walking into his life, and I was staying in mine, both of us whole. That evening, I sat by the fire again. The house smelled of wood smoke and snow. I opened my journal and wrote a list, not of tasks, but of truths. I am not anyone's shadow. Silence is not peace. Love without respect is not love at all. It is never too late to begin again. When I finished, I folded the page and tucked it inside the back of my sketchbook. My life had become a quiet collection of second chances. Not grand ones, but steady, deliberate moments of choosing myself. Later that week, I received a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a card with a handwritten note from Clara. "Thank you for your kindness. I'm learning, slowly. You were right. Truth grows better than control. With love, Clara." I read it twice, then placed it under a magnet on the refrigerator. It didn't need to be analyzed or saved as proof. It was simply a sign that healing had begun. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. That night, I stepped outside. The moon hung low and wide over the snow, casting everything in silver. The air was sharp and still. I whispered a small thank you to the cold, to the quiet, to the chance of another tomorrow that didn't demand apology. I stood there for a long time, letting the night breathe around me. Every sound felt gentle now. The wind through the trees, the crunch of snow under my boots, even the echo of my own heartbeat. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to explain my peace to anyone. February brought its own kind of stillness, the kind that made the world look frozen. But underneath, life was quietly preparing to return. I could feel it in myself, too. The ache that once sat heavy in my chest had softened into something patient, almost tender. One gray afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with a letter half written to Daniel. It wasn't about advice or apology, just a simple note saying I was proud of him and that I trusted the man he was becoming. I wanted him to know that my love no longer came with fear attached. But before I could finish, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Clara stood there, bundled in a wool coat, cheeks flushed from the cold. She held a small box in her hands. "I hope this isn't a bad time," she said. "Not at all," I answered, stepping aside. "Come in." She hesitated before crossing the threshold, like someone stepping into memory. I made tea while she looked around, her eyes landing on the painting in the hallway. "It's different seeing it here," she said quietly. "More alive somehow." "It's home now," I said. Like me. She smiled faintly and handed me the box. Inside was a small ceramic bowl, hand-painted with blue flowers. "I made it," she said. "My therapist suggested I take a pottery class. I thought you might like this one." "It's beautiful," I said, touched. "Thank you." We sat down at the table. For a moment, we just listened to the kettle whistle, the soft hum of the house. Then she said, "I wanted to tell you something about the night of that first dinner." I nodded for her to go on. "I was nervous," she said. "I thought I had to prove something, that I could control every piece of the wedding, every person, every feeling. I thought strength meant perfection. But I was wrong. I hurt you, and I hurt Daniel too." Her voice trembled slightly. It wasn't a performance. It was release. "Thank you for saying that," I said gently. "Most people spend years trying not to admit what they already know." She looked down, tracing the rim of her teacup. "Daniel told me how much you've changed. He said you helped him see that peace isn't something you beg for. It's something you build. I guess I wanted to learn how to build it too." I smiled. "You already started." We talked for nearly an hour, about marriage, about control, about what it costs to love without losing yourself. She asked how I managed to forgive so easily. "It wasn't easy," I said. "But forgiveness isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about refusing to stay stuck in the moment that broke you." When she left, she hugged me, not polite, not careful, just human. "Thank you for not giving up on us," she said. "I didn't," I replied. "I just stopped giving up on myself." After she drove away, I placed the small ceramic bowl on my windowsill. The afternoon light hit it, making the blue flowers glow. I stood there for a long time, watching the way the light moved through it. It wasn't perfect, the paint smudged in one corner, a small crack near the edge. But it was beautiful in its honesty. That night, I wrote the rest of my letter to Daniel. I told him that love is a living thing, that it changes shape and needs space to breathe. I told him that his father once taught me how to fear my own voice, but that life had taught me how to find it again. And I ended with a line that felt like a truth big enough to hold us both. "No matter where you go, may your silence be peace, not punishment." When I sealed the envelope, I didn't feel the weight of unsaid things anymore. I felt light, rooted, clear, and quietly alive. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and unhurried. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for what came next. I was simply ready. By the time spring came, the snow had melted into the soil, and the garden behind my house began to breathe again. Crocuses pushed through the earth, shy but determined. I watched them from the kitchen window, hands wrapped around my mug, and thought about how everything, flowers, people, hearts, blooms again once it's given warmth and patience. Life had settled into a quiet rhythm. My classes at the community center were fuller than ever, filled with women who had their own stories of loss and reawakening. Some came to paint, some just to sit in the company of others who understood. I no longer saw myself as their teacher. I was simply a witness to their courage. One afternoon during class, Ruth walked in holding a flyer. "Evelyn," she said, "the gallery is asking for submissions for a spring exhibit. The theme is reinvention. You have to send something." I laughed. "You're persistent. Persistent and right," she said. That night, I stood in my studio, staring at the blank canvas on the easel. My last painting, of the vineyard at dusk, hung beside it, a reminder of endings and freedom. But this new one, I realized, wasn't about endings. It would be about beginnings. I started with color, warm golds, soft blues, the green of early spring. I painted a woman standing in sunlight, her face turned toward something unseen. Not young, not flawless, but alive. Around her, faint outlines of others, people she'd loved, people she'd lost, faded gently into the background. She wasn't haunted by them anymore. She was held by them. When I finished, I stepped back and whispered, "There you are." A week later, I submitted the painting. The gallery accepted it immediately. The exhibit would open in May. The night before the opening, Daniel and Clara came over for dinner again. They brought wine and stories, laughter easy between them. When Clara stepped into my studio and saw the new painting, she gasped softly. "She looks free," she said. "She is," I replied. Daniel smiled. "You named it yet?" "Yes," I said. "It's called The Beginning After the Ending." He nodded slowly. "That's beautiful, Mom." "Thank you," I said. "It's not just mine. It's ours." When the night of the exhibit arrived, I wore the same blue dress I'd worn to that first dinner months ago. It fit differently now, not because my body had changed, but because I had stopped wearing it like armor. At the gallery, people moved slowly from piece to piece. When they reached mine, they lingered. Some smiled, some grew quiet. Ruth stood beside me, arms crossed proudly. "You did it again," she whispered. "I think this one did itself," I said. Then I heard Daniel's voice behind me. "She looks like you." "She is me," I said, turning toward him. "But she's also every woman who finally remembered her worth." Clara took my hand. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." When I looked around the room, I saw strangers connecting with the image, the light in their eyes mirroring my own. For the first time, I felt part of something larger than pain, something like grace. Later that evening, when the crowd thinned, I walked outside. The night was warm, the air filled with the scent of lilacs. Across the street, a young couple walked hand in hand, laughing softly. I smiled, not out of envy, but out of understanding. Life had its seasons, and I was finally in one that felt like home. As I stood there under the soft glow of the streetlight, I thought about everything that had brought me here. The message from Daniel, the dinner, the silence, the fire inside me that refused to die. Every hurt had shaped me, but none of them defined me. I had found freedom not in shouting, but in knowing when silence belonged to me. And that, I realized, was its own kind of art. The weeks after the exhibit felt like a soft exhale. Every day carried a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes when life stops demanding proof of your worth. I didn't need applause or validation or even constant company. What I wanted now was simplicity, truth without fear, connection without performance. One morning, as I was watering the garden, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned to see Margaret walking up the path, her gray hair tucked beneath a scarf, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon. "I baked," she said, smiling. "Figured you wouldn't say no to muffins." "Never," I said, laughing. "Come in." We sat in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the table, crumbs between us like small evidence of joy. She glanced around the house. "It feels lighter in here," she said. "It's the paint fumes from my studio," I joked, but she shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It's you." That afternoon, we talked about our mother, about the lives we'd both led trying to live up to expectations that were never really ours. Margaret admitted she was proud of me for finding myself so late and still calling it early. "Maybe it's never too late," she said. "It's not," I answered. "You just have to stop apologizing for being alive." Before she left, she handed me an envelope. "This was with Mom's old letters," she said. "She wrote it to you, but I think she never mailed it." After she drove off, I sat at the table and opened it carefully. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting uneven but familiar. "My dear Evelyn, you always had more strength than you believed. I worried I passed down my silence to you, but maybe silence can be softened into something wiser. If one day you feel lost, paint. It will remind you who you are." I read it twice, then pressed the page against my chest. For so long, I'd seen my mother as part of the chain of women who stayed quiet, but maybe she had known better. Maybe her silence wasn't weakness. It was waiting for me to find the words she couldn't say. That evening, I placed the letter in my studio beside my brushes. It felt right, like a blessing passed from one generation to the next. As night settled, I went out to the garden. Fireflies blinked between the flowers, their small light steady in the dark. I thought about Daniel and Clara, about how healing is never a single moment. It's a series of small choices every day to love without control and to forgive without forgetting. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Clara and I are hosting dinner next week. No special reason, just family. I smiled. My chest filled with something warm and full, a tenderness that didn't ache anymore. I typed back, I'd love to. Thank you. Both. When I put the phone down, I closed my eyes and listened to the night sounds, crickets, wind, the hum of the world still turning. I thought of the woman who once sat at a dinner table pretending not to understand Italian. How small she felt, how invisible. If she could see me now, standing here, unafraid, full of her own language again, I think she would smile. Maybe she'd whisper what I now know for certain. Sometimes you have to lose your voice to understand its worth. The stars shimmered overhead, and the garden smelled of rain. I whispered a quiet thank you to the past for shaping me, to the present for holding me, and to the future for waiting patiently until I was ready to meet it. The night of the dinner arrived warm and golden, the first true sign of summer. I drove slowly through the quiet streets toward Daniel and Clara's house, the same one that had once felt like a battleground. The neighborhood looked softer now, the light spilling from the windows gentle instead of guarded. I parked the car, took a breath, and walked to the door carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers I'd picked that morning. When Clara opened the door, her smile reached her eyes this time. "Evelyn," she said, "you made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, handing her the flowers. She took them carefully, like something sacred. "They're beautiful. Come in." Inside, the house smelled of roasted herbs and lemon, warm, familiar, alive. Daniel was setting the table, humming softly. He looked up, his grin unrestrained. "Hey, Mom, we're making your favorite." "I don't have a favorite," I teased. "You do," he said. "Salmon. You always said it reminds you of starting over." I laughed. "Then it's perfect." As we sat down, I noticed how everything about the evening felt different. The tension that once filled every silence had vanished. Conversation flowed easily, laughter echoing without effort. Even the house seemed to breathe. After dinner, Clara brought out dessert. Simple apple tarts, imperfect but made by hand. "I tried your recipe," she said shyly. Daniel helped, a little. "They look wonderful," I said, taking a bite, "and taste even better." She exhaled, relieved. "Good. I was nervous." "You shouldn't be," I said. "Nerves mean you care." Daniel poured coffee, his movements unhurried. "You know, Mom," he said, "I've been thinking about what you told me, that peace and silence aren't the same thing. It's funny, but I feel like I'm finally learning how to speak and listen at the same time." "That's all any of us can do," I said softly. "Keep learning." For a while, we talked about small things, the garden, work, the art classes. Clara asked if she could visit the studio sometime. "I think I'd like to paint," she said. "It seems like it helps you see things clearer." "It does," I said. "And sometimes it helps you forgive things you didn't know still hurt." The night wound down slowly. Daniel and Clara walked me to the door. The air outside was warm, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. Fireflies blinked along the fence like tiny stars. Clara hugged me first. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me another chance." I smiled. "You didn't need my permission. Just your own." Daniel hugged me next, longer, steady. "You're the bravest person I know," he said. I laughed softly. "I just got tired of being afraid." He nodded. "That's what bravery is, isn't it?" I looked at them both, standing there in the doorway, and felt a peace so full it almost broke me. The pain that once defined us had turned into understanding. The boundaries I once feared setting had become bridges instead. As I walked to my car, I turned back to wave. Clara was laughing at something Daniel said, her head tilted, light catching her hair. They looked like two people learning how to build love honestly, flawed, human, but real. Driving home, I rolled down the window, letting the warm night air rush through. I thought about everything that had led here, the whispered words in Italian, the humiliation that had sparked awakening, the long road through forgiveness. Every moment, even the painful ones, had carved space for something better. When I reached my house, I left the lights off and stood by the open window. The moon hung low, silver and tender. I whispered to it, "This is what freedom looks like." It wasn't loud or grand or triumphant. It was quiet and steady, like the rhythm of my own heartbeat. And in that quiet, I felt the soft pulse of life still unfolding, imperfect, unfinished, and completely mine. The next morning, sunlight slipped gently through the curtains, touching the edges of my room like a soft greeting. I woke without rush, the air light and still. The house smelled faintly of last night's flowers. I went to the kitchen, poured coffee, and sat by the window. For years, I had started mornings with lists, tasks, expectations, the invisible weight of proving my worth. Now there was only one rule: begin in peace. On the table sat the ceramic bowl Clara had made, holding fresh lemons. Its uneven glaze caught the light. I traced a finger along its surface and smiled. It wasn't perfect. Neither was I. But maybe perfection had always been the wrong goal. Life wasn't supposed to be flawless. It was supposed to be honest. As I looked out at the garden, something caught my eye. A small robin perched on the fence post, chest bright red against the morning gray. It sang a few notes before flying off, disappearing beyond the trees. I took it as a sign. Later that day, I met Ruth at the cafe downtown. The same one where I'd once faced Clara, but this time the air felt entirely different. Warm, filled with chatter and clinking cups. "You look peaceful," Ruth said, sipping her tea. "I am," I replied. "For the first time, I think peace isn't what you find. It's what you allow." She nodded. "You've become a different kind of teacher, you know. People talk about you at the center. They say you help them feel seen." I laughed softly. "I spent half my life invisible. Maybe I'm just balancing the scales." Ruth smiled. "What's next for you, Evelyn?" The question lingered. What was next? For so long, my life had revolved around survival, motherhood, endurance. But now, I felt a space opening, a clean page waiting for color. "I think I'll travel," I said finally. "Maybe to Italy. I've always wanted to see Florence, hear the language again, this time without pain attached." Ruth's eyes lit up. "You should. Promise me you'll send a postcard." "I will," I said. "Maybe I'll even write it in Italian." When I came home that afternoon, I started making a list of places to see. Florence, Siena, the Tuscan countryside. Not grand plans, just possibilities. For once, the future didn't feel like a threat or a dream. It felt like a friend waiting patiently at the door. As the sun set, I stepped into the garden. The air carried the first warmth of summer. Bees drifted lazily between the flowers, and the breeze smelled faintly of lavender and soil. I knelt, hands in the dirt, planting a new row of lilies. The same kind I used to tend when Daniel was small, before life demanded so much giving. The earth was cool beneath my fingers. I pressed the roots gently and thought about all the versions of myself buried and reborn in this same soil. The young mother, the frightened wife, the quiet woman at the dinner table, and now this. Someone who had learned that silence can either cage or protect, depending on who owns it. I stayed outside until the sky turned violet. When I finally went in, I left the back door open to let the night air follow. The house no longer echoed. It hummed with presence. Before going to bed, I stood in front of my newest painting, The Woman in Sunlight. Her face was calm, her posture sure. Behind her, faint brushstrokes hinted at a horizon that didn't end. I whispered, "You did it." The painting didn't answer, but the truth it held surrounded me like breath, soft, steady, infinite. Tomorrow I would book my flight. I didn't need anyone's approval, and I didn't need permission to begin again. The life ahead was uncharted, but for the first time, I was not afraid of the blank canvas. 2 months later, I stood in Florence beneath a sky so blue it looked painted. The air was warm and thick with the scent of espresso and old stone. Street musicians played along the Arno, and the city pulsed with a kind of beauty that didn't apologize for being loud or imperfect. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere without needing to earn it. I rented a small apartment near Piazza Santo Spirito. It had tall windows and faded green shutters, and from my balcony I could see rooftops stretching like sun-warmed seashells. Each morning, I'd wake early, walk to the market, buy fresh bread, and listen to the hum of life around me. I didn't speak much, but I understood everything: the rhythm, the laughter, the unspoken ease of people who knew they were allowed to exist freely. One afternoon, as I wandered through a small art gallery, I found myself standing before a painting of a woman sitting at a table, head tilted slightly, a faint smile on her lips. There was something familiar about her serenity. The plaque beneath read, "La donna che ascolta," the woman who listens. I stayed there for nearly half an hour, letting the image sink into me. She wasn't powerful or grand. She was simply present. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from sadness but recognition. She was who I'd been trying to become all along. Later, at a cafe overlooking the river, I ordered cappuccino in Italian. The words came out smooth, natural. The waiter smiled. "Perfetto," he said. "Grazie," I answered, smiling back. It felt good to speak the language again, not as a weapon, not as a secret, but as music. That evening I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. "Mom, how's Italy?" "It's beautiful," I said. "Everything smells like history." He laughed. "That sounds like something you'd paint." "Maybe I will," I said. "How are you both?" "We're good," he said. "We're learning a lot, about each other, about patience. Clara's been taking art classes. I think you inspired her." "That makes me happy," I said. "Tell her I'm proud of her." "I will. And Mom?" He paused, his voice soft. "Thank you for giving me space to grow. Thank you for meeting me halfway," I said. After we hung up, I sat on the balcony, the city glowing beneath me. Bells rang in the distance, echoing across the rooftops. I closed my eyes and let the sound fill me. I thought of the first dinner, the sting of laughter, the silence I wore like armor, the decision that changed everything. I had come so far from that table, yet part of it lived inside me still. The woman who smiled through pain was not a ghost anymore. She was the foundation beneath my peace. The next morning, I visited a quiet chapel near the river. Inside, frescoes lined the walls, faded but still beautiful. I sat alone on a wooden bench, watching sunlight stream through the stained glass. The light moved across my hands like water. I whispered a small prayer, not to anyone, not for anything, but of gratitude, for endings that made space for beginnings, for the son who'd found his courage, for the woman who'd finally learned to stand in her truth. When I stepped back outside, Florence shimmered in gold. The bells began again, louder this time, and I felt something inside me lift. I walked through the streets slowly, my steps steady, my heart unguarded. The language of life, I realized, isn't spoken, it's lived. And in that moment, under the Italian sun, I understood what freedom really meant. It wasn't leaving home. It was finally arriving in yourself. By the time summer began to fade, Italy had already seeped into my bones. I spent my mornings painting in the open air near the Arno, the smell of wet stone and coffee drifting through the streets. The locals started greeting me by name, Signora Evelyn, the woman who painted the light. I had become part of the rhythm here, one brushstroke in a larger masterpiece. One afternoon, as I was packing up my easel, an older Italian woman stopped beside me. Her name was Lucia, a shop owner from down the street. She pointed at my painting of the river and said, "You see it differently. Most people chase the color. You paint the silence." Her words made me smile. Maybe that's because I've spent most of my life inside it. She nodded, touching my arm gently. "Then you've learned something many never do: how to listen." That evening, back in my apartment, I wrote those words on a scrap of paper and pinned it above my desk. How to listen. It had taken me almost 70 years to understand that listening wasn't about others. It was about hearing myself and believing what I heard. Daniel called later that night. I could hear the city noise behind him, car horns and laughter. "Clara and I are moving," he said. "A smaller place near the park. We want something that feels more like ours. That sounds wonderful, I said. Fresh starts are good for the soul. He hesitated. Mom, I think we're going to try to have a baby. The words settled into me softly, like warm light. You'll be amazing parents, I said. I hope so, he said, then laughed. Clara says she wants our daughter to have your strength. I smiled, tears filling my eyes. Then she'll have more than enough. After the call, I stood by the open window, watching the city hum beneath the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a violin played. I thought about the generations that came before me. My mother, her mother, the long line of women who had learned to survive through silence. Maybe this new life Daniel and Clara were hoping for would grow up in a different kind of house, one built on truth instead of fear. The next morning, I returned to the gallery that had first taken my breath away. The curator recognized me immediately. Your painting from the spring show, she said. People still ask about it. I felt my cheeks warm. That was another lifetime ago. Every lifetime teaches something, she replied. Would you like to exhibit again? I hesitated only a moment. Yes, I said, but this time I want to show the whole story. Over the next few weeks, I began working on a series of paintings called The Table. Each one captured a version of the same scene: the dinner, the laughter, the silence, the awakening. In the final piece, the woman sat alone at the table, smiling, not in defeat, but in peace. Her hands rested open, her eyes meeting the viewers as if to say, I am still here. When the collection was displayed, people lingered longest at that final canvas. Some cried quietly, others smiled knowingly. Lucia found me among the crowd and said, You didn't paint a dinner, Evelyn. You painted forgiveness. I looked at the canvas, at the woman who was and wasn't me, and felt something like truth settle deep inside. Maybe I did, I said. After the exhibit closed, I walked through the empty gallery one last time. The walls echoed with quiet, the good kind, the kind that belongs to peace earned honestly. As I stepped outside, the wind carried the smell of rain. I tilted my face toward the sky, eyes closed, letting it touch me without flinching. Every drop felt like a blessing. For years I had measured strength by silence. Now I knew better. Strength was the sound of a woman breathing freely, finally unafraid of her own voice. Autumn returned to Florence with a different kind of beauty. The air was cooler now, touched with the scent of rain and fallen leaves. The crowds thinned, and the city moved at a slower rhythm, one that matched my own heartbeat. I spent my mornings walking along the Arno, sketchbook in hand, capturing fragments of life: an old couple sharing bread, a child chasing pigeons, a street artist painting in silence. Each scene felt like a piece of a larger truth, that life keeps happening, quietly and bravely, even after everything changes. One afternoon, I received a video call from Daniel. His smile filled the screen. Mom, he said, we have news? Before I could ask, Clara appeared beside him, glowing. We're expecting, she said softly. A little girl. The words washed over me like music. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I said, she's already loved. Daniel laughed, his eyes bright. We want you to come home when she's born. We can't do this without you. You can, I said, smiling, but I'll come anyway. After the call, I sat at my small kitchen table, hands trembling slightly around my teacup. A granddaughter. The thought felt unreal, like a promise I hadn't dared to dream. I walked to the balcony and looked out at the city, the warm terracotta roofs, the endless sky. I had come here to find myself, and now life was calling me back, not to the past, but to something new. That evening, I began a new painting. This one wasn't about silence or sorrow. It was about inheritance, the invisible things we pass on. I painted a pair of hands, one older, one small, reaching toward each other, but not quite touching. Between them, a thread of gold light. Connection. Hope. Continuity. When the painting was finished, I titled it Luz Dentro, Light Within. It felt right. A few days later, Lucia came by with coffee and pastries. She studied the painting, her eyes shining. "It's your best work yet," she said. "It's not just mine," I said quietly. "It belongs to everyone who learned to love without disappearing." She smiled. "That's all of us, in one way or another." In the weeks that followed, I began preparing to return to the States. I boxed up my paintings, said goodbye to neighbors who had become friends, and walked through every street I'd come to love. At the Ponte Vecchio, I stood watching the river, remembering the woman I had been when I first arrived. Lost, cautious, learning to breathe. Now I felt steady, grounded, open. Before leaving, I mailed a package to Daniel and Clara. Inside was the painting loose dentro with a note that read, "For her, when she's old enough to understand that love isn't silence, it's light." When the day came to leave, Lucia met me at the train station. "Promise you'll come back," she said, hugging me tightly. "I will," I said. "But for now, there's another story waiting." On the flight home, I watched the clouds drift below like pieces of cotton. I thought about my mother's letter, about Margaret, about every version of myself that had led me here. I realized that healing isn't a single ending. It's a rhythm, a return, a choice we keep making. As the plane began to descend, I whispered a quiet prayer. Not for strength, because I already had that, but for gentleness, for the grace to guide the next generation without holding them too tightly. When the wheels touched the ground, I felt the pulse of home rising up to meet me. Not the home of old pain or silence, but a new one, rebuilt on truth, forgiveness, and love that finally knew its own name. I smiled out the window, the sun breaking through the clouds like a benediction. The light within me had never gone out. It had just been waiting for me to see it. The day my granddaughter was born, the world felt impossibly bright. The nurse handed her to me, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket, her tiny face scrunched in protest at the light. I held her carefully, my arms trembling with awe. Daniel stood beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder, his voice soft. "Mom," he whispered, "this is Ella." I looked down at the baby's face. Her eyes blinked open, dark and curious, as if she already knew me. "Hello, Ella," I said. "Welcome to the world, sweetheart." In that moment, I understood something I had never been able to name before. Love doesn't start over. It continues. It finds new faces, new voices, new chances to do better. Clara smiled from her hospital bed, exhausted but glowing. "Do you want to hold her a bit longer?" she asked. "I could hold her forever," I said, and meant it. Daniel laughed quietly. "Careful. She might believe you." "That's all right," I said. "It's good for children to believe in something steady." Hours passed in a blur of soft voices and small miracles. The way Ella's hand wrapped around my finger, the way Daniel looked at his wife with gentleness instead of fear. I saw in their faces the work of love done right. Imperfect, patient, alive. Later, when the room grew quiet and the baby slept in her mother's arms, Daniel sat beside me. "I've been thinking," he said. "You've come so far, Mom, from that night at dinner to this moment. It's like you've built an entirely new family." "Not new," I said, "just truer." He nodded slowly. "I want Ella to grow up seeing that. That love can be strong and kind at the same time." "She will," I said, "because you'll show her." He smiled, and for a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who trusted me to make the world safe. This time, he didn't need safety from it. He needed permission to live fully inside it, and he had that now. When evening came, Clara handed me a small envelope. "I found this when we were cleaning the nursery," she said. "It's from Florence. I think it's yours." Inside was a postcard I'd written, but never mailed. It showed the Ponte Vecchio bathed in golden light. On the back, in my handwriting, were the words, "Every silence can become music if you learn to listen for yourself first." Clara smiled softly. "That's beautiful." "It's true," I said. As I drove home that night, the city lights flickered through the windshield. I felt the same calm I used to feel painting at dawn, the stillness after creation, the peace after long effort. Life had not given me the story I expected, but it had given me the story I needed. When I reached home, I placed the postcard on my mantel beside the ceramic bowl, now filled with Ella's first tiny photo. The room glowed with the soft hum of contentment. I looked around, at the walls covered in art, at the memories tucked into corners, and whispered, "We made it." Then I opened the window. Outside, the night air carried the scent of jasmine and rain. Somewhere, a train passed in the distance, its sound fading gently into quiet. I thought of Florence, of my mother's letter, of every moment that had brought me here. Freedom, I realized, isn't about leaving pain behind. It's about carrying it with grace and letting it teach you how to love without fear. As I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the glass. Older, yes, but finally whole. Somewhere in the darkness, a new life was beginning. And for the first time, I didn't need to whisper anything at all. Silence had finally become peace. Every story has a sound, and mine began in silence. The kind that bruises first, then teaches you how to breathe again. When I look back now, it feels like I've lived several lifetimes inside one name, Evelyn Harper, the quiet mother, the invisible wife, the woman at the dinner table pretending not to understand, and finally, the woman who decided that dignity wasn't something others gave you. It was something you built alone, in the dark, until the light found you again. I used to believe that strength was measured by how much pain you could carry without breaking. Now I know that real strength is the courage to set it down, to say no kindly, to stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to listen. There's freedom in that, a quiet, holy kind. When I think about Daniel, about Clara, about the small miracle named Ella, I don't feel the old ache anymore. I feel gratitude, the kind that doesn't erase what came before, but honors it. The hard nights, the words swallowed, the moments that almost broke me, they were not wasted. They were lessons in becoming. I've learned that boundaries are not walls, they are bridges built with self-respect. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means refusing to stay anchored to pain. And that love, the real kind, asks for truth more than perfection. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to remember, it's this. You are not defined by the worst moment someone gave you. You are defined by the moment you decided it wouldn't be your ending. There's a world that opens when you stop apologizing for your own voice. It's quieter, but truer. Sometimes freedom doesn't look like running away. It looks like coming home, to yourself, to your art, to your own reflection without flinching. I found that freedom sitting at a table once meant to humiliate me. I found it in the echo of laughter I refused to let wound me again. And I found it in the eyes of a child who will grow up in a family rebuilt on truth. If this story has reached you, maybe it's because you too are standing on the edge of change, tired, unsure, but ready. I hope you know this. It's never too late to start listening to your own voice. If this story has reached you, maybe it's because you too are standing on the edge of change, tired, unsure, but ready. I hope you know this. It's never too late to start listening to your own voice. If Evelyn's story touched you, like this video, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing how far these stories travel and how they find hearts that are still learning to begin again. See you in the next life story with love and respect.